Welcome to Cinema Recapped. In this video, I am going to explain first season of the series, Lupin, released in the year 2021. The story revolves around a janitor named Assain Diop, who works for a museum in Paris. For some reason, he has adopted the alias, Perena Louise, to work at the iconic museum. One day he learns that a high-priced diamond necklace, once owned by Marie Antoinette, is about to be sold off at an auction next week. While cleaning the museum, he finds himself admiring the piece of jewelry. Assain has a son named Raoul with a woman named Claire, but has mostly been an absent father as he keeps going in and out of his young son's life. However, he has managed to keep a good relationship with Claire and provides her alimony, though irregularly. One day loan sharks, Vincent, Kevin and Rudy show up at his home and demand the money he owes them. But Assain is unable to pay, thus the goons threaten to kill him. To calm them down, Assain informs them about his plan to steal the multi-million-dollar necklace and asks them to join him. Initially, the loan sharks are hesitant as the plan is too dangerous. However, after Assain explains everything in detail, they agree. Afterwards, Assain plans to get all of them into the museum through the janitor's entrance by stealing the IDs of his co-workers. Here, a flashback reveals that Assain's father Babacar used to work for the Pellegrinis, the family that bought the necklace from the Third Reich. However, 25 years ago it was stolen from them. After being stolen, it was split in parts, and 7 of its gemstones were scattered across the world. But surprisingly, the Pellegrinis succeeded in tracking down all of the gemstones and brought the restored necklace back to France. Since Assain used to live with the Pellegrini family, he had become friends with Juliette, daughter of Mr. Hubert Pellegrini. Juliette's mother, Mrs. and Pellegrini, was a kind woman who used to lend books to Assain from her library. One day, the valuable necklace went missing and Babacar was immediately accused of stealing it. Movie flashes back in the present, and on the day of the auction, Assain enters the museum as Paul Cernine, a potential buyer, while the other 3 enter posing as janitors. According to Juliette, with the sale of the necklace, she plans to start a foundation to support cultural and artistic projects world over. As the auction commences, Assain's partners neutralize the guards in the janitor section. Afterwards, Vincent and Kevin make their way to the auction hall, while Rudy takes down the CCTV cameras. At this point, the group have only 7 minutes to finish the heist and escape before the police get alerted. Meanwhile, Assain makes the highest bid and buys the necklace. He then pretends to check the necklace before making the payment. As he takes the necklace in his hands, as per their plan, Vincent and Kevin attack him and the museum staff and steal the necklace. They quickly rush to join Rudy, waiting for them in a car outside the museum, and run away. But fortunately, the police are alerted quickly, and they start chasing the goons. Eventually, the trio end up crashing their car and get caught. At this moment, the movie again flashes back into the past, where a young Assain is seen visiting his father in prison. A prison officer goes to bring Babacar over. Sadly, he finds him hanging in the cell. Assain tearfully buries his father by himself. Mrs. Pellegrini also arrives to offer condolences, but Assain angrily tells her off. On returning home, Assain finds Arsène Lupin's book, Gentleman Burglar, left behind by his father as a gift. Movie flashes back in the present, and we see the police arrest the thieves and recover the necklace. Afterwards, Detective Youssef Gadaira arrives at the scene to investigate the case. Movie again flashes back to 2 weeks earlier when Assain initially learned about the re-emergence of the Queen's necklace and its approaching auction. Consequently, he springs into action immediately and finds a job at the Louvre Museum using manipulation tips and tricks he learned from Lupin's. Only then it is revealed that Assain taking a loan from Vincent, then Vincent and his friends hounding Assain to return money, and subsequently they taking part in the heist was all part of the Assain's grand plan. Assain had also sought his school-time antiquarian friend, Benjamin Farrell's help, to make an exact replica of the necklace. While struggling during the heist at the museum, Asane replaced the real necklace with the fake one and smuggled the real one outside using his position as a janitor. Movie flashes to present and we see the police also realize that the necklace they recovered from the goons is fake. Thus they start a search for the original one. While investigating the case, Detective Youssef finds the whole thing so strange that it bears an uncanny resemblance to the stories of Arsène Lupin. And he eventually realizes that Paul Sirnine and Arsène Lupin are anagrams of each other. The day after the heist, Asane gives his son Raoul Arsène Lupin's book, the one his father had gifted him. Later Asane learns from his antiquarian friend Benjamin Farrell that the diamonds from the necklace have never been taken apart and scattered across the world as the Pellegrini family had claimed. Resultantly, Hussein begins doubting that his father could be responsible for the theft. Thus, using a gemstone of the original necklace, he lures Juliet for a secret meeting and confronts her. Eventually, Juliet admits that her family's story about the scattered gems was a deception to build hype around the necklace for the auction. But she adds that Babacar did really steal the necklace, and that Mr. Pellegrini then bought it back from a jeweler in South Africa. Meanwhile, some undercover police detective try to listen in on their conversation, but Asane manages to block their mic feed and safely gets away. Yet unsatisfied, Asane goes through his late father's last letter, which leads him to Etienne Comet, the prison mate of Babacar. But Asane has a hard time meeting Comet, because the latter refuses to meet anyone. With no choice left, Asane places himself in jail to speak to Comet. But there he learns that Comet's health has been declining for a while, thus he spends most of his time in the prison clinic. Adamant, Asane purposely picks a fight with a fellow prisoner Vincent, who stabs him with a sharp object. Consequently, Asane is rushed to the prison clinic and asked to stay there till he gets better. Later at night he talks to Comet, and it is revealed that the latter worked at prison library during Asane's father's incarceration. Comet tells him that Babacar borrowed a book, titled Confessions of Arsène Lupin, from the library, and when he returned it, he asked Comet to give the book to the person who comes looking for him in the future. The next day Asane finds the book in Comet's locker room, inside of which he finds annotations from his father, spelling out the phrase "I am innocent," framed by Anne Pellegrini. On the other side, Juliet goes to meet her father and asks him if Babacar really stole the necklace. The question frustrates the old man and starts yelling at her, while claiming that Babacar indeed stole the jewel. Same night Asane fakes his suicide, using a drug he stole from the prison clinic, which briefly affects his heartbeat. Thus, he is immediately rushed to the hospital. And while in the way to hospital, he manages to escape from the ambulance. Next day he meets Anne and confronts her. Strangely, she is happy to see Asane and confesses to him that she instructed Babacar to sign the false confession at the urging of the police inspector Gabriel Dumont. Babacar agreed to sign the contract because Dumont had assured Anne that the judge would be receptive to Babacar's situation as a Senegalese immigrant raising his son alone in France, but the judge turned out to be very strict, and regrettably Babacar couldn't accept the verdict and ended his life. Then, a flashback reveals that following Babacar's death, Dumont was the person who forcibly turned Asane over to the social services. And at the orphanage, a generous donor made arrangements for Asane's study at an expensive private school. Asane met Benjamin at the same school, and the latter often saved him from bullying by other rich students. Flashback in the present, and reveals that she was that generous donor. Asane finally believes that she was telling the truth. Meanwhile, Youssef continues to investigate the Arsène Lupin connection, happening upon Babacar's case file. After learning that Inspector Dumont was responsible for handling the case against his father, Asane kidnaps the now Commissioner Dumont from City Hall. Later, Dumont gains consciousness in a solitary room, with a camera and a screen in front of him. Asane speaks to him from another room, without revealing his own identity. Asane shows him a picture of Babacar, and the movie then flashes 25 years back, after the necklace had already been stolen. And during the course of the investigations, a younger Dumont learns that Mr. Pellegrini, who had recently had the necklace's insurance policy increased, masterminded its disappearance and set Babacar up to take the fall. Movie flashes back in the present, and Dumont refuses to open his mouth, thus Assain confronts him, referring the expensive vacations he has been to with his wife, which were paid for by two criminals involved in drug and human trafficking. However, Dumont arrogantly challenges him to report him to his superiors, implying that they are all as corrupt as him. Then Assain threatens to tell everything to Dumont's wife, as he really loved her, and she is under the impression that he is an honest and hardworking person. Tricks works, Dumont finally cracks and pleads with Assain to keep his wife out of this. Assain gives him water and takes a break to pick up Claire's call, who reminds him about Raoul's upcoming birthday. Assain her that he has planned a surprise for their son. Here, a flashback reveals that Assain met Claire in high school, where they became friends after he saved her from two boys who were teasing her. Back to the present, Assain continues interrogation, but in the process, he inadvertently reveals his own identity. On learning who Assain was, Dumont again starts insisting that Babacar was guilty. Fed up, Assain decides to forgive him and let him go. However, just the same time, police track his location. But fortunately, he manages to escape moments before he gets surrounded. Dumont is rescued in the next scene, but he does not reveal any information about identity of his kidnapper. On returning home, he notices the hidden cameras Assain had installed in his room to spy on him. It takes him hours to locate and remove all the cameras. Exhausted, he then takes a shower and starts thinking about the time he was invited by Mr. Pellegrini to his home. It turns out that after Mr. Pellegrini realized that Dumont was making a case against him for insurance fraud, he threatened the police officer's wife and convinced him to trick and into getting Babacar to sign the confession statement. After the shower, Dumont calls Mr. Pellegrini and talks to him about the necklace case. Predictably, Assain intercepts their conversation and becomes assured that Babacar was framed. Afterwards, Assain again meets Dumont and coerces him into providing more information about Mr. Pellegrini. To get the burden off his back, Dumont gives him the name of Fabien Barriot, a former investigative journalist, who was blacklisted and ruined by Mr. Pellegrini after publicly denouncing his corruption in a book titled Dirty Money: The Pellegrini System. Assain goes to meet her and tries to talk about her book, but she refuses to speak. Elsewhere, Youssef discovers Dumont's involvement with the original investigation and connects it to the necklace's last theft and Dumont's abduction. Thus, he takes it up with Dumont, who asks him to find more concrete evidence linking the two cases. Meanwhile, Fabien eventually comes around and decides to help Assain. And we come to know that Mr. Pellegrini's company almost had collapsed in 1995, thus, to save his empire, he framed Babacar to get the insurance money. Fabien drives Assain to the newspaper, where she worked all her life before Mr. Pellegrini got her fired, and helps him steal a box labeled 80s Sports from the archive room of the newspaper. It turns out the box contains a tape connecting Mr. Pellegrini's arms deal to a 1996 deadly terrorist attack on French embassy in Kuala Lumpur. In the next scene, Assain anonymously posts an image from the tape on Twitter, threatening to release the whole video, on which Mr. Pellegrini assures Juliet that it is nothing, and while talking to the press, he denies the accusations. During the press interaction, Fabien appears unexpectedly and questions him about the Kuala Lumpur bombings. Thus, after the press conference, Mr. Pellegrini's henchman Leonard Cohn begins stalking Fabien, but she manages to dodge him. Assain then tells his next plan to Fabien about going on a TV talk show to expose Mr. Pellegrini, instead of posting the video on social media. Elsewhere, Youssef eventually manages to draw an accurate sketch of Assain. But as Dumont learns about this, he removes Youssef from the necklace investigation. Realizing that the detective is closing in on the truth, about his involvement in the original case. Meanwhile, Asane heavily disguises himself for his TV interview and provides the show with the compromising footage. But the plan to expose Mr. Pellegrini goes awry, as it turns out the show's host is a friend of Mr. Pellegrini. Thus he manages to have the footage altered before going live. Meanwhile, soon after the show, Mr. Pellegrini's goons attack Asane, but the latter manages to escape. After watching the altered video, Juliet becomes convinced of her father's innocence and discloses to him that Asane is behind the accusations as well as the Louvre heist. Mr. Pellegrini's henchman Leonard shows up at Fabienne's home and demands to know Asane's whereabouts. But she refuses to cooperate. And regrettably, when Asane arrives at her home, he discovers her body hanging from the ceiling, much to his horror. Elsewhere, despite being removed, Youssef continues to pursue the case and figures out that Asane gave the TV interview in disguise. Asane gets devastated by Fabienne's murder, but he refuses to back down, especially after finding a note from her, requesting him to bring Mr. Pellegrini down. Subsequently, he hands over Fabienne's dog Jacques to Benjamin before heading out. But soon he's spotted by Leonard, who starts chasing him. However, Asane somehow manages to outrun him. Asane then heads straight to Claire's home to meet his son Raoul and wish him a happy birthday. Later, he gives Raoul Lupin's costume as a gift, but the boy seems unimpressed. So Asane informs that he has planned another surprise for him. He also guilt-trips Claire into canceling her date and coming along for the surprise. Here, in a flashback, Claire is seen speaking to a psychologist. She tells the psychologist that her partner is a pickpocketer and that she doesn't really know if she loves him or not, adding that she feels sometimes he is her soulmate, but other times he ruins everything. Flashback into the present, and we see Asane is taking his family to a Lupin-themed festival at Etretat. While on the train, Asane notices that Leonard has been following them. Leonard informs his boss, Mr. Pellegrini, about Asane, who orders him to get rid of Asane but leave Claire and Raoul alone. Sensing the danger, Asane promptly sings happy birthday to Raoul, pretending as if he was leaving his family. The bait works, and Leonard follows him. Asane lures him into the luggage compartment and successfully locks him inside, and return back to his family. But as the train pulls into its destination, Leonard manages to free himself and arrives exposing a gun, and sits next to Raoul, making Claire uneasy. However, Asane keeps calm and covertly messages the police as Paul Cernine and calls them at the station for a meeting. Afterwards, he asks Claire and Raoul to disembark ahead of him while he stays behind with Leonard. Leonard threatens him at gunpoint to come with him. Asane obliges, but as soon as they get off the train, Asane successfully manipulates the waiting local police into arresting Leonard as if he was Paul Cernine. The police find a gemstone from the necklace in Leonard's pocket as damning evidence. Asane catches up with his family in the next scene, and the family make it to the festival without major incident. While at the beach, Asane lets Raoul explore the beach by himself, while he goes on a walk with Claire. She asks him about Leonard, and Asane finally comes clean to her and tells her the tragedy faced by his father. He tells her that he needs to settle some score, after which he'll stop all the crap. He assures her that he'll change, and urges her to give him one more chance to prove himself. However, Claire gets frustrated because he had made such promises to her 100 times earlier also. Then, suddenly the two realize that Raoul has gone missing. Meanwhile, back at the police station, the detectives realize that the man they arrested is not Paul Cernine. But before they could talk to him, they learn that Commissioner Dumont has already released him from police custody. On detectives questioning about letting Leonard go, Dumont loses his temper and insists that Leonard was framed, and orders them to go through the list of train passengers to find the real Paul Cernine. Back at the beach, where Claire and Asane are searching desperately for their son, Asane sees Leonard at one end of the beach, forcing Raoul into his car before driving away with him. While Asane worriedly looks for his son, Youssef appears from behind and calls out to Asane, addressing him quizzically as Lupin. That's all from the season 1. Hope you enjoyed the video. If so, subscribe for more content like this. And don't forget to hit the like button. Leave a comment if you want us to summarize any of your favorite movies. See you in the next video. Take care.
Bye.